Greetings, good afternoon. I am Sarah Graham, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am the Communications and Advocacy Manager here at the YWCA National Capital Area. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are gathered here to have our courageous conversation, the fall of Roe. How did we get here, and what do we do about it now? As we all know, this summer, Roe versus Wade was overturned. And while some people were surprised about this ruling, most people that have, while some people were surprised, it wasn't unexpected for many of us, especially to those that know the history of abortion rights in this country. So how did we get here, and what can we do about it now? Let's talk about it. This afternoon, we are joined by two panelists, Shoshanna Ehrlich and Lily Bolourian, to have a conversation about the legal history of abortion in this country, how we got here, and what you can do to support abortion and reproductive justice efforts today. This conversation will run about an hour with 30 to 45 minutes, a panel discussion, and then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. A few housekeeping reminders as we get started. Please take a minute and introduce yourself in the chat. I know we have some of our YWCA sister orgs joining us today. So please introduce yourself and tell us what you're hoping to learn today. During the panel, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we hope we'll have some time to get to them at the end. I've muted everybody right now. If you're not, take a second and double check that. We like to keep you muted until we get to our Q&A. And as a reminder, we are a 501c3 organization, and this conversation and resources shared here will be nonpartisan. Now I want to pass the mic to Monica Gray, our CEO of YWCA National Capital Area, for a quick introduction.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Monica Gray. I have the pleasure of being the leader of this extraordinary organization. As many of you are probably aware, the YWCA of the National Capital Area is part of a consortium of YWCAs around the nation. There are more than 200 YWCAs nationwide in about 48 different states. And we are a legacy organization, having dating our history back to over 160 years. We are one of the original women's rights organization in the country and around the world. So YWCA is also an international organization, and we have a upcoming international meeting in a couple of months in New York. And we were founded originally to fight for rights, and particularly as women began to enter the workforce in the mid 1800s. And then we took on racial justice is also one of our initiatives as slavery was ended in our country. So our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And that is work that we have done for more than 160 years nationally and more than 115 years regionally as the YWCA of the National Capital Area. And as you can imagine, sadly, in recent years, we seem to be starting anew with some of the efforts that we have made to eliminate racism and empower women. And this conversation we're having today addresses one of the many issues that we are having to undertake anew to regain some, the progress that we had made decades ago. And so we thank you for joining us today, and we are delighted to have Lily and Shoshanna walk us through some of the history of this work, and then more importantly, what we can do in the present and in the future. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Monica. So let's get started. Shoshanna, if you want to introduce yourself, tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and then Lily, you can do the same.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm truly delighted. And so I began my career many years ago as a lawyer in something called the Women's Law Collective, where I represented women, particularly victims of intimate partner violence in family law cases. And I also began working to take teens to court. We have despite our liberal reputation here in Massachusetts, which is fairly true, we had one of the first parental consent laws in the country. And so I gotten sort of involved in the repro rights justice movement by taking young women to court who really, for a variety of reasons, couldn't involve their parents in the abortion decision. That's been something I've done a lot of, both sort of political activism, academic research about. And then from there, I moved, actually, after a number of years and some burnout, I moved into academia. And I've been a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at UMass Boston, and do most of my work around the legal regulation of sexuality and reproduction. So, thank you.
Thanks. Lily, if you want to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Lily Bolourian. I am the Executive Director of Pro-Choice Maryland. We are the policy and political leader for abortion access in the state of Maryland. We're the only organization that works in every county in the state to fight to expand access to abortion and to reproductive health generally. I joined Pro-Choice Maryland back in November, and I'm happy to be the first woman of color to lead the organization in 31 years. We are a legacy organization, and I am a proud daughter of Iranian refugees and have been a lifelong Marylander. I am very excited to talk about my on-the-ground work, and I'm also have a background in health law. And so I'm really excited for this discussion and look forward to answering any questions and kind of getting into it all. So thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Let's get into it. So as I mentioned in my intro, some people were a little bit shocked that Roe was overturned, and I'd love to hear y'all's opinions. Can you tell us like why people shouldn't have been? Whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to start this one. You can start the next one, Lily. So
Perfect.
I think the reason the first thing I want to say is I was not at all shocked, but it doesn't mean I wasn't devastated. And I think the way someone put it, and I think was in the sort of the best way to articulate, is if you have someone you love and they're chronically ill and you know they're going to die, it doesn't make the grief when they do less intense. And the sort of still the sense of shock, even though you really did anticipate that it was coming. And I think that captured for me, and I think for what a lot of people felt who really weren't shocked. And the reason I would say that is that the court overturned Roe, and it also overturned Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And although Planned Parenthood versus Casey affirmed the fundamental right to abortion in that the court declared in Roe, it also opened the door to greater regulation of abortion, because the Casey court said that the court in Roe had undervalued the state's interest in protecting fetal life, and that as long as rules and regulations didn't impose an undue burden, that states could pretty much do what they wanted in order to persuade women to become mothers rather than to terminate a pregnancy. And so the court, since then, states have just enacted ever increasing restrictions aimed at chipping away the right. And as I say to my students, there's public transportation down the street from me to the abortion clinic in Massachusetts, and there's several that we don't realize here in a very blue state, notwithstanding the fact we have a Republican governor, but that where access is pretty readily available, that in states where these restrictions have gone into effect, what it has meant is for large swaths of the population, particularly those from vulnerable and marginalized communities, abortion right has sort of has existed in name only for many years, and that abortion access has been tremendously eroded. And so I think being aware of that makes this result not shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. You really hit the nail on the head. I mean, the states have been the laboratory for all of these anti-abortion access, all of these racist, all these transphobic things that we are seeing occurring, that people are shocked to see kind of mainstreamed, are things that the states have been facing for decades. And I think that one of the reasons that there was a lot of shock was that, unfortunately, there is a kind of belief that Southern states are going to kind of always be regressive, so we shouldn't pay attention to them. And that is such a mistake. And it is leaving behind the millions of good people who are trapped by those legislators. And so I think that one of the most important things is an awareness and not even 50 states, a whole region solidarity when it comes to abortion access laws, and when it comes to a legal landscape that can help to keep people, allow them to terminate their pregnancies without having to worry about going to prison or entering the system in some way. And so I think that I wasn't shocked. I was also devastated. I also, cried myself to sleep many nights, and I still have trouble believing sometimes that we're here. But I think that it's important that we understand, although it's painful, is that Roe is gone forever. It's not like a temporary thing. We're not going to get it back. Our best hope is for a better law to supersede that. But Roe, that law is gone. And so we need to reckon with that. And I think grieve and mourn that loss. It's really, really important. But we also have to realize that the other side has been working from townships to cities. Little by little, they are passing things that we sometimes will even scoff at. Oh, they passed an ordinance declaring themselves an abortion-free zone. First of all, no, they didn't. That's impossible. But second, they're doing all of these things not just for fun. They are preparing to make this mainstreamed and nationalized. And so I think it's just really, really important that now, especially, folks are laser focused on what the other side is doing and has been doing and intends to continue to do. And shock isn't the word, but anger is fair and righteous. And I hope everyone on this call is angry.
Thank you, Lily. I think this really leads right into sharing a little bit about what the landscape of abortion rights looks like in Maryland right now. Like what's protected, what isn't. If you could share a little bit.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So Maryland is a state who has very good legal protections for abortion. So in this past session, we passed the Abortion Access Act. It was the first pro-abortion bill that has passed the Maryland legislature in my whole lifetime, so over 30 years. And this bill, what it did was it immediately expanded access to abortion by allowing for qualified advanced practice clinicians who are non-physicians to provide abortion care. It's already happening in many other states. Maryland had a physicians only law that meant that nurse midwives couldn't provide abortion care, that nurse practitioners couldn't provide abortion care. And so we passed this law, and there was $3.5 million included in the law to go to train new providers in abortion care. Unfortunately, our governor has chosen to hold those funds and not release it until he leaves office. And so while legally we have expanded abortion care, in practice, we still have trouble getting folks trained to provide that care. So legally, it's a good situation, but when it comes to access, we still have a lot of problems. There's also, there were 3 bills in the last legislative session that were introduced related to abortion care. Only one of those 3 passed. The other 2 were the Pregnant Persons Freedom Act, which currently on the books in Maryland, although it has not happened or we don't actually have evidence that it's happened at all, it is legal for you to be prosecuted for the outcome of your abortion. So, or of your pregnancy, I'm sorry. So if you, even if it's not an abortion, if you use recreational drugs and it induces miscarriage, you can be criminally charged in Maryland. It is on the books. So we've relied on prosecutorial discretion, and since Roe versus Wade has been overturned, a lot more state's attorneys have come out and said, we will not prosecute for abortion access. But the truth is, it's allowed legally. And so that's a huge problem. And so that's something that our organization and many other organizations are working to close that gap and to ensure that criminalization is completely taken out of the picture. Because the problem too is that the way that our Constitution is written, we have a supremacy clause. So if if we have a situation where a majority of anti-abortion folks take over Congress, there is a possibility of them passing some kind of a personhood bill or something that would supersede all of our state laws. So at the very least, states need to be making sure that they're not going to ever prosecute individuals for their pregnancy outcomes. And so that is one other key thing. And we also have, there was a fight for us to have a constitutional amendment that directly addresses abortion access and reproductive liberty generally. And that unfortunately did not advance, and it's something that we will fight next session for. But while our rights are codified, even in a state that's considered to be somewhat of a safe haven for abortion access, we have to be extremely vigilant, and we are, because there's also counties doing their own ordinances, also counties doing their own, maneuvers that we have to be tracking. So I think that, it all comes down basically to, we have legal abortion protected in the state of Maryland, and it will stay that way. But abortion access remains an issue in all 24 counties in Maryland. And this is what you're kind of seeing in a blue state, in a state that's considered to be super progressive on abortion access. And to be clear, we do allow abortions throughout the pregnancy in Maryland. It is legal to have a later abortion in Maryland due to fetal anomaly, due to health of the pregnant person. And so these things are super progressive, but we've still got a lot to go, even in our blue state.
I like this distinction between access is specifically really at the local level. And as I say a lot, local elections really matter. And that's where our work should be really focused. So Shoshanna, I want to take a bigger, more historical picture. Lily, thanks so much for sharing about what you're working on the ground doing right now. Shoshanna, can we talk a little bit about where our criminal abortion laws came from, in the era before Roe? I think that's interesting. You're on mute.
Here we go. Yeah, I just realized that. My students always apologize, and I'm like, trust me, faculty and speakers always forget. You don't need to worry about it. Yeah, so what I was saying is this is one of my favorite topics, and I could talk to you all day, but I promise I won't. So I think one of the things that's really an important and lost part of this history is right now, and there's a little footnote in the Dobbs case, and also Justice Thomas, in a concurrence in a prior case, really talks about abortion as eugenics and sort of this idea of promoting Black genocide. And that idea has really gained some traction, including now by a footnote in Dobbs and an entire concurring opinion. But I think what people don't recognize is that our nation's original criminal abortion laws were deeply eugenic, were built on sort of misogynistic and nativistic, I'm calling them ideals, but they're not ideals. They're the opposite, but to the people who proposed that. So I just want to sort of talk about why this history feels particularly and painfully relevant today. So without going into all the detail, basically our criminal abortion laws, the statutes that were enacted by legislators, didn't come about as a result of sort of religious agitation, the involvement of religious leaders, etc., but really was a campaign by medical doctors that started in the mid 19th century, so that in the middle of the 19th century, no state lawmakers had enacted an anti-abortion law, except there was limited exceptions around, like to protect women from being poisoned, because often what was ingested could kill you. So there was some limited, but it wasn't like a big controverted issue. And then in the 1900s, starting around like late 1850s, early 1860s, white middle-class Protestant, quote, native-born elite physicians, all men who had gone to medical school, began to notice that middle-class white Protestant women, the birth rate was rapidly declining, in part because of the women's rights movement, which began in its first phase in the 1800s. Before then, abortion had really not been used to control family size, but more by unmarried women who had slipped from the path of virtue, as they referred to it, and it was to sort of hide their sin. And so it was a very kind of marginal practice. Mainstream medicine was not worried about it, but it began to be clear that these married matrons of a certain race, class, etc., their birth rate dropped precipitously and linked to a use of abortion for family planning. At the same time, there was a steep upsurge in immigration around this time, mostly from like Eastern Europe. So it was Eastern Europe, and then Ireland as well, sort of lesser whites, and many of whom were Catholic, were having larger families. And so doctors really began to, and there's more we can talk about, but the doctors really mobilized under the aegis of the American Medical Association, a nationwide campaign to criminalize abortion unless a doctor certified it was necessary to save the life of the pregnant. I'm going to use woman because I didn't think about it in terms of person. I'm going to use the language of the time. And so by 1900, every single solitary state had enacted a criminal abortion law. And essentially, there was a lot of discussion by the doctors about how this was necessary, because married women were shirking their holiest duty to bring forth living children, that the nation was going to be overrun by aliens, that the sort of power of the best people the world had ever seen was being diluted and overrun by aliens. I mean, the language is really, I have written on this. If anyone has an interest, I can send you something on this. The language is really quite shocking. If one goes back, I spent a couple of years going through all of these medical journals from the time period. And so that was really encoded into our criminal laws, a very deeply gendered and deeply nativist view of sort of women and which women had this duty to procreate. And so those were the laws that were really in effect in, as I said, in every state in the country. And then in the decade or so before Roe, there were sort of two waves of change. One is that actually doctors and lawyers sort of began the first wave of change. It wasn't calling for repeal, but for liberalizing the same kind of thing that's being fought about now, about should our law have exceptions? I mean, it's just remarkable, this revisiting of the same debate. So there was a push, partly because more liberal doctors read the life exception more broadly. Some of them were arrested at one point for example, providing abortions to those who had rubella, German measles, which actually was fatal to the fetus, and charges were brought against them, and so began to think about the irrationality. So at that point, a number of states liberalized, meaning it was still a crime, which is what's happening now, but rape, incest, fatal fetal anomalies as exceptions. And then starting with Colorado, pre-Roe, a handful of states actually repealed their criminal laws and abortion laws. And that was really directly attributable to the women's rights movement, because decision-making authority has to be lodged somewhere, right? And so with liberalization, it was still lodged in the state. There were just little carve-outs. But the idea was that the state shouldn't be making those decisions, which is pretty much what Roe said, with a caveat to that, up until the third trimester. And so it was a repeal and shifting the locus of decision-making authority from the state to pregnant people themselves. And so by the time of Roe, about a third of the states had either liberalized their abortion law or repealed it. I think, I forgot to double check the number. I think it was 6 states had actually repealed pre-Roe.
Wonderful, or interesting. Wonderful is not the right word there. Interesting, wonderful information. I think I like the Roe, pre-Roe and post-Roe. What after Roe, what kind of role did the lawmakers play in essentially ending it? I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, so this is for me, right? To
Yes,
follow
ma'am.
up. Okay.
Oh, you're muted again.
Unmute there. I was being so responsible, muting myself so quickly. So basically, first of all, the anti-abortion movement began pre-Roe. And I sent some resources, but I thought of another one that has some original documents about this history, which I can send to Sarah to distribute. But in any event, the Catholic Church began to really mobilize against abortion pre-Roe in response to this liberalization move, and to sort of warn people about what this meant. But after the court decided Roe, the movement just really took off. And there were sort of two, initially in terms of the law, there was the push for fetal personhood. And I think Lily had mentioned saying about that again is something that we really need to pay attention now, because if there is a constitutional amendment, I'll talk about like at the federal level, declaring the fetus a person, then abortion ceases to exist probably anywhere. And so one drive was the sort of absolutist view, was to amend the US Constitution. And I think also Lily mentioned this idea of supremacy. The federal Constitution is the supreme law of the country. So it wipes out anything that's inconsistent by states. So one is, but they tried to get a human life amendment through, and it never passed. The other strategy was what we've now seen, this like drip, right? We've all had probably leaky faucets, that annoying drip that ultimately could flood your house. I mean, that's kind of what's happened. So originally though, post-Roe, the Supreme Court invalidated almost all those efforts with interesting two major exceptions that many of you may well be aware of. Those impacting poor women through the Hyde Amendment and the denial of public funding, and those affecting teens through allowing parental involvement requirements. So sort of probably the two least powerful in a way, poor women, young women. The court said, no, we can limit their rights, but pretty much, and I'm happy to talk more about that, but pretty much other than that, the court struck down all of these incremental laws that states started trying to pass, saying, interferes with the Roe right. These have nothing to do, these are clearly sort of, they have nothing to do with sort of the state's interest and fetal life, which does not come into being until viability. And so the court invalidated them. But then, as I mentioned earlier, post Casey, that's when you really see this incremental approach, which incremental but powerfully limiting, really flourish. And so I think that's really legally when the shift was, and primarily. And so this gradual erosion, and I agree very much with what Lily said about sort of, not giving up on the South. But if you look at a map of its Midwest and South in terms of where access abortion deserts exist, and now primarily where abortion bans. I mean, it's that same like the election map on the coasts. So I mean, I have other things I can say, but I think I'll stop there.
If I could just add one, that was amazing. The one thing that I would mention is that Roe, the Supreme Court has to this day not overturned Buck v. Bell, which is a case that the Supreme Court ruled that the state is allowed to sterilize individuals in psychiatric institutions. So that remains the law of the land. And that is like, it adds a whole other layer to why we fight for reproductive justice as a whole, because it really speaks to the most marginal intersections of individuals of reproductive capability are the ones who are being systematically oppressed. So I think that Buck v. Bell is one of the most disgusting court cases. If you don't know about it, read about it. It's honestly disturbing, but it remains the law of the land. I think that's really important for folks to realize.
Lily, that actually leads into a good question about, thank you for sharing. I know a little bit about it, but definitely not enough to discuss. What are some other, name one thing that you think people don't know about the fight for abortion access?
Wow, I think there's so many things, but I think maybe one of them is that I don't think folks realize how dangerous it is for doctors, for advocates. It's a lot of the, vitriol that we're seeing, on a national scale have been individual activists, individual providers have had to deal with these threats by themselves with very little government support, very little policy in place to protect people. And I think that folks don't realize that how much the other side is obsessed with this issue. Not because they care about children, we've established that, but because the control that comes with abortion laws is if that's gone, they don't really have much to stand on anymore. If the full autonomy of every individual person is codified under law, that really messes with their whole game plan. So I think it's really important for us to kind of reckon with the fact that we need to show up for each other in many different ways. and that supporting individual organizations and activists who are doing the work in any way is so impactful for the sustaining the movement, because the truth is that people are becoming burned out, and if we lose the people who are fighting on a day-to-day basis, then we are in a huge trouble. So I think that that's one thing that I don't think that we speak about it enough as people in this fight. Maybe we don't want to complain, and it's really not even a complaint, it's just an awareness. Doing this work, I'm sure my email box right now, I probably have a really nice email from an anti. It's just part of the work, and we've had to come to accept it. And I think that that sucks. And I think that it's important that other folks who are really in this fight realize like how critical it is for folks to support us.
Shoshanna, what about you? Do you have like one thing that you think people just don't know?
I have two. Can I say two?
Sure.
I actually had I have a longer list, but I'll limit it to two. One is, and this was on the right after the Dobbs decision, the Center for Reproductive Rights had on their website, which is that I always have this on the handy. Yeah, so we're moving in the opposite direction of the global community. Not that other countries don't have rules like El Salvador, not that other countries don't have very strict laws on the books, but we're only one of only 4 countries that have rolled back abortion rights since the 1960s. And that I think I jotted this down. Yeah, so that I always sort of think about this, that since I think it's 1964, 60 countries who have enacted laws have been in the direction of liberalizing. So we're really kind of this outlier now in terms of the global trends. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is that in Dobbs, the Supreme Court is so hostile to Roe, and it blames Roe for igniting the abortion controversy. It blames that decision. And it sort of says, okay, by returning authority to the states, we're just going to calm the waters. Well, the waters are so not calm now. And on the ground, the uncertainty, as Lily said, for providers, for advocates, the law's a mess, and no one is calmer about this issue. And so it's just so hypocritical of the court. They knew this wasn't going to solve and tamp down the passions. And in fact, there's more uncertainty now than there's ever been, and more stress and more danger. So I really hold the court accountable for that.
Thank you. I want to take a minute and kind of wrap up this this panel discussion with, as we always do, giving our audience some calls to action or some takeaways. What can they do today to support your efforts? Lily, if you want to make your calls, if you will.
I'm happy to. Absolutely. Wherever you live, there is an abortion fund that needs your support, and that can be financial, that can be driving folks to appointments, that can be helping with communications. There's so many. There is genuinely a role for everyone in this movement. And if you live somewhere where you feel like, there's going to be local organizations everywhere, but if you feel like there's something that has not been addressed, organize, create your own collective. This is how, and it could be you and 2 people that you really like. You don't realize the impact that tiny action has, and it's so powerful. And that's how most of these organizations were born. It was just a couple people who were hanging out. And so I think that abortion funds have an excellent plan for how to continue to get people abortion care while we figure out the legal parts, because that's never going to stop. We're still the demand for abortion has not decreased. Of course, it's only increased. And so find your local abortion fund, get plugged in with their efforts, if you are interested in becoming a doula or becoming somebody who works in this kind of space, you are so needed. You know, in Maryland, we have the Baltimore Doula Project. They run trainings and they, teach you the skills that you need to be able to be a doula to help patients through their abortion procedures. And I think that it's pretty obvious, but vote in every election. And I mean, like everyone, like if you don't want to vote for the president, okay. But I promise you there's a school board seat that's important. I promise you that, the mayor of your town, you should look into what he's, pushing. These things are hyper local issues that grow nationally. And so you'll have the most impact when you start super small. And I just want everyone to feel super empowered. There is a role for you in this movement and you are so welcomed and wanted. Thank you for arriving. It's really good to see you. And so there's a million things. Pro-Choice Maryland, we are constantly working with our allies and the coalition groups in Maryland to push out various, resources and ways to get involved. So please do, get in touch with us and get plugged into our work. We are super excited to be working to expand abortion in a time where abortion is genuinely criminalized. So those are my immediate calls to action.
So just, I second everything that Lily said. I did put a link in the chat to Bands Off Our Bodies, which is sort of sponsored by Planned Parenthood mainly, but it keeps track of abortion funds, different calls for action in different states. And so it's really a great resource to check if you want to get involved. And the other thing is in states where abortions are still legal, a lot of providers need to become a clinic escort because the activism, the risk, the vitriol has really increased post Dobbs. And so that's another thing that is also really needed. So that's really what I have to add.
Thank you so much. And as we do with these conversations, I will share out some of these resources to attendees so they can plug in when they're ready. So let's open up our Zoom to any questions that our audience may have. Feel free to turn on your camera if that makes you comfortable, or just come off mute with anything you want to ask our folks here.
Don't be shy. You can ask us anything.
Hello, hi.
We're ready.
Hello,
Or just say hello. Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. My name is, I don't have my camera on right now.
That's
It's
okay.
just one of those crazy days. I'm looking cuckoo, but I had to join this conversation because it's so informative and so helpful. But I just wanted to know, I also work for YWCA in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's so refreshing to hear this great conversation from a sister organization. And I'm working on just trying to create more opportunities for our YW community here in Charlotte to learn more about this topic and getting engaged from a voting perspective and an advocacy perspective. Like, where do you guys think I should go first? Because I feel like a little lost in really trying to get the information, like connect with certain people. Where would you suggest I go first? Thanks.
Thank you, Jamila.
I'm happy to say, if you're in North Carolina, so I would go plugging one of our sister organizations, Pro-Choice North Carolina. They are an excellent place to begin because they have the resources to basically all of the groups and efforts organizing in North Carolina for abortion access. And so, they're really the ones pushing to write the different policies and different laws that are hopefully being pushed to pass pro-abortion access bills in North Carolina. So I'm happy to plug my friends over there. They do great work, and I think that that's a really great way to start. And also, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the local abortion fund in North Carolina, you can find that by going to abortionfunds.org. And you can find all the local funds. But I would super suggest Pro-Choice North Carolina.
Sarah, if I could share my screen for a minute, I'll pull up the link to Bands Off Our Body, just so people can also.
I think I can give you access. Hold on one second. I don't know if I can. Here, I can open it.
Sarah, I just made it.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you,
Thank you. So I just want to share this. This is the link I put in the chat, but this is the bands. And I think what Lily said is targeted specifically to North Carolina, but if other people have the same question, this is really a great, there's Get Involved, it's help, links to abortion funds, to social posts, to different ways to help pay legal costs. It's sharing stories, etc., etc. It's really a very good resource. And it's kept pretty up to date. And I believe it also has a map on it of where different actions and protests are taking place. It's kept pretty current. So I would recommend that as well.
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, Jamila,
Sure.
I'm happy to connect with you too to talk through some of our national orgs that we have based here in DC that do abortion access work and connect you with them. Definitely as a sister org. So feel free to
Yes,
we have a quick
I'm
email.
already saying yes.
We can chat.
Yes, I'm already saying yes. Thank y'all.
Anyone else?
Hi there. My name is Serena. I work for the Ywca Resolve Family Abuse Program in Charleston, West Virginia. And I was just wondering, when all of this first started happening, and abortion is completely banned in West Virginia right now. My first thought was for people that do want to get pregnant, they're at the point where they want to start having children and building a family with their spouse or whoever. Are there any resources for like pregnancy complications or diseases or sicknesses that could affect someone while they're pregnant that would have to result in getting an abortion for the mother's safety, that people could possibly like look into and know like what's protected in their state, what's not protected in their state? Any information or research on that?
That's a really great question. And I want to just respond first by pointing out what's underneath, which is that the risk that you have simply by getting pregnant now, right? Like if you have a pregnancy complication and you're in a state that has a ban, what that means for even thinking about having children. So that's one of the things that I'm actually writing about now, like the court was just oblivious to, didn't care. So I just want to point that out, that it can also disrupt. I think, Serena, as your question really powerfully indicates. So and the other thing, and then I will tell you one place I think you might want to go, which is that the other thing people have to realize is the landscape changes every hour. Courts enjoin, they lifted an injunction, I think it was Alabama or Arizona, just reinstated a law from 1869, which would have been one of those physician laws. So there's nothing, I think it's important to recognize that anyone can say with certainty. I mean, that's one of the things that's very, very scary, because it is just so in flux, this landscape. having said that, the place I might recommend for medical is ACOG. It's the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Be careful, there's an anti-abortion one that's like the crisis pregnancy centers that has a name that's very similar, but ACOG has really taken a pretty powerful abortion support position, and they publish a lot. And so I don't know, great, thank you. I don't know if they have anything specifically on this, but that might be a really good place to start. And I imagine they would have a resource list, because that sounds very, and maybe like there's a lot of OBGYNs are speaking up and out, and there may well be a group in your state, but I might start at ACOG. I don't know if anyone is in the health field or has another resource specific to that question.
Yeah, I would say that. I think that the Center for Reproductive Rights, so reproductiverights.org, they do tracking of a lot of the like anti-abortion laws being passed in the state. So I don't know if they include like what exceptions exactly exist, but they are pretty up to date on like the new restrictions. And so that I think would be a good resource. Also, ACOG is definitely an excellent place as well. So I'll just drop that in the chat. Just reproductiverights.org. They track throughout all the states. So I imagine also, I know because as Shoshanna said, everything keeps changing so rapidly. I don't know if like the Guttmacher Institute has caught up to everything yet. Yeah, but I would imagine that they have some good resources as well, because they do a lot of state by state analysis and research and work. So Center for Reproductive Rights and Guttmacher Institute would be my suggestions.
I would second, I was going to suggest that as well. The only caveat I would sort of add is that in a state with a ban or a near total ban, and this is one of the things that is that the exceptions are very, very limited. So just hypothetically, I don't want to not to raise, I know this is a charged issue, but let's say someone decides that they're not in a position to care for a child with Down syndrome. That's not going to be like, that might be your personal decision, but that's not going to fit in to any of the ban exceptions. So that's also where it's not life-threatening. It's not, unless, again, going back to pre-Roe, you could get a psychiatrist to say someone is so overwhelmed that if they have to care for a child with particular needs, they might kill themselves. I mean, that's what doctors did pre-Roe. So that I think your question is absolutely worth looking at those, but I think there's a lot of situations where the reason a person might decide to terminate doesn't fall within one of the legal exceptions that would be mapped on these state, like Guttmacher or the center. I mean, and there's been doctors talking about how this is so impactful of like they're compromising their duty to their patients, and stories about how in states with bans that essentially, and they're scared of losing their license, they've actually told pregnant people, you have to go home and wait until your life is actually in danger, and then you come back and I'll do the abortion. And what a terrible, terrible dilemma it is between providing the care that you're obligated. And there's also there is something that hospitals that get federal funding under EMTLA, emergency medical, I forget the name of it, that Biden says, you can't turn people away. But it's doctors are just, are in probably the most precarious position in terms of knowing when they can and they can't. So
Well, this has been an interesting and informative discussion. Wanted to wrap up here and say thank you to Lily and Shoshanna for joining us this afternoon. I will send out a recording of this conversation along with some of the resources that have been mentioned here in the coming days. Just wanted to remind you, as I always do, we at the YWCA, our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. If that empowers you, you should help support our work to do that. So you can go to our website and make a contribution. Also wanted to alert you to a couple of upcoming things that we have on our calendar. If you live in the DC area, we will be registering voters at GW on October the 6th. From 10 to 2 if you want to come out and see us and get registered to vote. If you're not, or check your voter registration, or just learn more about your voting rights in this area. Then moving into October, October 17th through the 21st is YWCA's Week Without Violence, and we will be doing a peace walk that week. So excited to have you join us. If you live locally, look for more information on our email, and on social media. And then the biggest day, November the 8th, that is Election Day. So please get registered to vote. If you're not, double check your voter registration, tell your friends and family. There's a link directly on our website to do so. And we are happy and wonderful supporters of all elections. So and then I want to also one more plug for our next courageous conversation. Yes, we are very busy at the YWCA. Our next courageous conversation will be post-election, and that will be on November the 17th. I will include some more information in your follow-up email. So join us in this very, very important work. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So
And I
much.
just put my email in the chat. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to be in touch, have you be in touch.
Wonderful. Thanks, friends.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.